There's a memory a lot of you have. It's summer. You're somewhere between 8 and 14. You left the house in the morning, maybe after breakfast, maybe before anyone noticed, and you just went. No phone, no check-ins, no GPS. Your parents had a general sense of which direction you'd headed. That was it. The day unfolded on its own terms. You found your friends by showing up at their houses. You solved problems by being bored first and creative second. You came home when the streetlights came on, or when your stomach told you it was dinner time, or when your name echoed down the block in a voice that meant now. Nobody tracked that day. Nobody documented it. It exists only in the specific weight of it, somewhere in your memory. If you were born between the mid-70s and mid-80s, you know exactly what that felt like. And you've probably realized somewhere along the way that the world your children are growing up in has no equivalent, not even close. This isn't about nostalgia. It's about understanding what was actually lost and what that loss has quietly done to all of us. When we talk about freedom here, we're not talking about politics or rights. We're talking about something more elemental, the freedom to be unobserved, unreachable, unaccounted for. For most of human history, this wasn't a luxury. It was just the texture of daily life. People moved through the world without leaving a continuous record. They had conversations that disappeared when they ended. They made mistakes that faded rather than calcified. Privacy was simply the default condition of being a person. Your generation was the last to experience that as children. In childhood, psychologists will tell you, is exactly when it matters most. Research on child development consistently shows that unstructured, unsupervised time isn't just pleasant, it's functionally necessary. Developmental psychologist Peter Gray's work found that free play, the kind where children set their own rules and face their own consequences without adult intervention, is critical for developing emotional regulation, risk assessment, and intrinsic motivation, the ability to do things because you want to, not because someone is watching. You built those skills because you had to. Nobody was managing your afternoon. And there's something else about that freedom that gets lost when you try to explain it to someone who never had it. It wasn't just the absence of supervision, it was the presence of consequence. If you climbed a tree and fell, you dealt with it. If you had a fight with a friend, you worked it out, or you didn't. If you made a bad decision, the feedback was immediate and real. That loop, action, consequence, adaptation, is how humans learn to trust their own judgment. You spent years in it. Then the world changed, not all at once. The way weather changes, gradually and then suddenly. The pager, the brick-sized cell phone, the landline that could now reach you outside the house. Then the flip phone. Then the device that was always in your pocket, always on, always capable of reporting your location to anyone with access. And alongside the technology, the culture of parenting shifted. Stranger danger, helicopter parenting, the slow disappearance of the neighborhood as a place where children moved freely. Researchers at the University of Michigan tracked children's time use over several decades and found that between 1981 and 1997 alone, free play dropped by roughly a quarter. The trend never reversed. You watched this happen in real time. First from the inside as a kid losing it gradually, then from the outside as an adult who could see clearly what had been given up. What makes your generation's position genuinely unusual is this. You didn't just live through the transition, you were shaped by both sides of it. Your foundational years, when your sense of self was forming, when you were learning how to be in the world, were largely analog, largely unsupervised, largely free in the old sense of that word. Then you grew into adulthood in the new world. You adopted, you integrated it, you did what humans do. What that leaves you with is a kind of double vision. You can see both worlds clearly from the inside. That perspective, uncomfortable as it sometimes is not nothing. What was actually lost? Let's be honest about the losses. Not to pretend everything was better, it wasn't, but because the grief is real and worth taking seriously. The first loss was presence, a specific kind of being here-ness that existed when here was the only option. When you sat with your friends, you sat with your friends. When you were bored, fully, without a screen interrupting the feeling before it became something else. Boredom is generative. Researchers at the University of Central Lancashire found it actually increases creative thinking because an unstimulated mind begins reaching for its own resources. You were bored a lot. You built things out of it. The second loss was anonymity. Your childhood happened when being embarrassing was survivable. The stupid thing you said at 14 didn't follow you to a job interview at 34. Identity was allowed to be provisional, something you tried on, discarded, revised. Human memory is merciful by design. It softens edges. It lets the worst moments become stories rather than evidence. The permanent record didn't exist yet. That was a gift most of us didn't know to be grateful for until it was gone. The third loss is harder to name. It's the experience of being genuinely alone with your own thoughts. Not lonely, alone. There's a difference. Loneliness is the painful awareness of missing connection. This aloneness is something closer to what contemplative traditions have always valued. Your own mind, uninterrupted, given time to settle and arrive somewhere unexpected. A 2014 study published in Science found that many participants preferred receiving mild electric shocks to sitting alone with their thoughts for 15 minutes. The researchers were surprised. They probably shouldn't have been. We had already begun losing the capacity. You still have it, not because you're superior, but because you practiced it for years as a child, waiting, thinking, staring at the ceiling. That practice left something that didn't fully disappear when the screens arrived. What you still carry. There's a reason people from your generation tend to show up differently in a crisis. Not dramatically, but in the specific quality of staying calm when things are uncertain, of making a decision without 17 inputs, of tolerating discomfort without immediately needing it to stop. Those aren't personality traits, they're skills, built through years of unconscious practice in all those hours when nobody was watching, and the only thing available was your own resourcefulness. You also carry something subtler. The ability to evaluate technology rather than simply inhabit it. Because you remember before, you can see it clearly. You know what it felt like to navigate a city without GPS, which means you understand what you give up when you outsource that kind of knowing. You have a reference point that exists outside the system. In a world where most people have no experiential memory of life before constant connectivity, that reference point is genuinely rare. Psychologists studying post-traumatic growth, researchers like Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, have found that some people, after significant difficulty, don't just recover but emerge with capacities they didn't have before. Perspective, resilience, a clearer sense of what actually matters. The growth doesn't come from the hardship itself, but from the meaning-making that follows, the slow work of integrating what happened into a coherent understanding of your life. Your generation has been doing a version of that for 30 years, holding two worlds that don't fit neatly together in the same body, the same values, the same daily life. That's not easy, but it produces something real. The freedom you had as a child is not coming back. The world that made it possible no longer exists in the same form. That's worth sitting with rather than rushing past. But you're not just someone who remembers a better time. You were shaped by it in ways that are still active. The patience, the self-reliance, the capacity for silence, those didn't disappear when the smartphone arrived. They went somewhere. They're still there. You are the last people who will ever know what human life felt like before it became permanently documented, permanently connected, permanently observed, and you knew it as children when it formed you most deeply. That knowledge is worth something, not in any way that shows up on a resume, but in the way you can still stop, in the way you still remember what it meant to be somewhere without needing to record it. The street lights came on. You went home. Nobody took a picture. That was enough, and some part of you has never forgotten it. What's the one thing from your childhood that no one born after 1995 would fully understand, not just the thing itself, but the feeling of it?